the emperor was still there. Emperor Xian of Han sat at the center of the old ritual universe, recognized by court ceremony, sealed by ancestral legitimacy, and surrounded by the language of heaven, hierarchy, and dynastic continuity. His name still appeared in edicts. His seals still confirmed appointments. His body still represented the lawful center of a civilization that had spent 4 centuries teaching its elites that order flowed through one sacred office. To the scholar official, he remained the son of heaven. To the provinces, he remained the legal source of rank and command. To ambitious generals, he had become something even more valuable. He was a weapon. This is Professor Adrian Lockwell for Archives of Humanity. And the story that follows is not merely the fall of a dynasty. It is the anatomy of a political paradox. How an empire can die while its symbols remain alive. How a throne can survive after power has migrated elsewhere. How legitimacy, once separated from force, becomes one of the most dangerous hostages in history. The Han Dynasty ruled China from 206 BC to 220 AD. A span so immense that it shaped the political imagination of East Asia for millennia. It inherited the hard administrative bones of the Qin Empire, softened them with Confucian moral vocabulary, and built a world in which registers, taxes, roads, armies, calendars, rituals, and official ranks all converged on the imperial center. The emperor did not merely govern territory. He governed the grammar of legitimacy itself. But by the final century of the Eastern Han, that center was no longer a command tower. It was becoming a prize. The catastrophe did not arrive as a single thunderclap. It advanced through a chain of crises, each intelligible in isolation, each lethal in combination. Social distress widened beneath the polished language of order. Great families accumulated land. Peasant households slipped into debt, dependency, and flight from the tax registers. The court hardened into a battlefield of eunuchs, imperial relatives, scholar officials, and military men. Trust, the invisible architecture of empire, began to fracture. Then, in 184 AD, the Yellow Turban Rebellion erupted across multiple regions, forcing the Han court to arm local officials, provincial commanders, and gentry militias in order to survive. The dynasty crushed the uprising, but the cure poisoned the patient. The empire had defended itself by teaching the provinces how to live with their own armed protectors. 5 years later, in 189 AD, palace politics turned suicidal. After the death of Emperor Ling, factional struggle at court invited outside military power into the heart of the dynasty. Into that breach marched Dong Zhuo. He seized Luoyang, dominated the court, deposed one emperor, installed Emperor Xian, and exposed the terrible new rule of the age. The throne could still sanctify power, but it could no longer defend itself. From that moment, China entered an age of men who spoke loyalty while calculating sovereignty. Coalitions formed in the name of restoration and dissolved into private ambition. Yuan Shao carried aristocratic prestige. Sun Jian, and later Sun Quan, embodied the armed confidence of the South. Liu Bei preserved the moral language of Han continuation. And Cao Cao, perhaps the sharpest strategic mind of the crisis, understood the central fact before most of his rivals. The throne itself was not power. Access to the throne was power. Fan Ye's book of the later Han preserves the courtly drama of a dynasty consuming its own foundations. Chun Shou's records of the Three Kingdoms, written from the shadow of what followed, reveals how successor states remembered, justified, and contested the ruins of Han authority. Between those sources lies the central fracture of the age. Legality and violence no longer lived inside the same institution. The road ahead passes through Guandu in 200 AD, where intelligence and decision speed shattered superior mass. Through Red Cliffs in 208 AD, where geography and coalition denied Cao Cao the final unification. And finally to 220 AD, when Emperor Xian abdicated and the Han, hollowed long before it ended, formally disappeared. But before the hostage emperor can be understood, the machine that made him worth capturing must be reconstructed. The question is not simply why the Han fell. The deeper question is what kind of imperial system had to exist for one captive ruler to remain the most coveted asset in China. The throne was worth capturing because it sat atop an extraordinary machine. To understand the political value of Emperor Xian, the story must move backward from the captive sovereign to the operating system that made a sovereign matter. The Han was not merely a dynasty of palaces, armies, rituals, and court robes. It was one of history's great experiments in converting conquest into administration, and administration into civilization. The Qin had supplied the hard skeleton: centralized command, written law, standardized measures, roads, registers, and the uncompromising idea that private power must bow before public authority. But the Qin burned with a dangerous intensity. It unified with astonishing force, then collapsed under the political cost of terror without consent. The Han inherited the Qin machine, but made it more durable by changing its language. Beneath the surface remained the tools of legalist rule: taxation, punishments, appointments, population registers, military obligations, and chains of command. Over that structure, the Han placed Confucian moral vocabulary: hierarchy as ethical order, service as cultivated duty, obedience as harmony beneath heaven. That fusion was the genius of the dynasty. Power no longer appeared only as coercion. It appeared as culture. It appeared as morality. It appeared as the natural grammar of the world. Across the empire, commanderies and counties translated imperial authority into local procedure. Households were counted. Fields were assessed. Grain flowed through fiscal channels. Labor obligations maintained roads, canals, courier stations, granaries, walls, and military supply lines. At different periods, the state asserted control through monopolies, especially over resources such as salt and iron, because the court understood a principle every durable empire eventually discovers. Sovereignty is not a proclamation from a throne. Sovereignty is the capacity to count, tax, transport, store, appoint, punish, and feed. The Han did not merely rule territory. It ruled the grammar of legitimacy. The emperor stood at the center of that grammar. He was not simply the strongest man, nor merely the commander of armies. He mediated heaven, law, time, office, and status. He issued calendars, confirmed appointments, granted titles, framed legal authority, performed sacrifices, and transformed elite ambition into recognized rank. A provincial magnate might possess land, retainers, clients, and armed influence, but prestige still became fully legitimate only when the imperial order acknowledged it. The court made ambition legible. It converted local power into office, and office into loyalty. After Emperor Guangwu restored Han rule in 25 AD, the dynasty's center shifted east to Luoyang, beginning what historians call the Eastern Han. Fan Ye's book of the later Han preserves the institutional memory of this world, a court of immense ritual sophistication, but also a court whose stability depended on balance. Scholar officials, imperial relatives, eunuchs, frontier commanders, and provincial elites all had roles within the structure, and each role carried its own incentives. There lay the strategic problem. The empire was too large to be ruled by imperial presence alone. It required delegation. Scholar officials interpreted law and moral order. Imperial relatives guarded dynastic continuity. Eunuchs gained influence because palace access became a political channel of its own. Frontier commanders accumulated authority because border warfare rewarded speed and hardened loyalty. Provincial elites mobilized grain, labor, credit, and local obedience faster than distant ministers could ever hope to do. Modern historians such as Rafe de Crespigny and Mark Edward Lewis help frame the late Han not as romantic legend, and not as a simple morality tale of corrupt men ruining a perfect order, but as a strategic transformation. Institutions created incentives. Incentives created networks. Networks created rival centers of power. This was not yet the literary world of romance of the Three Kingdoms. It was the colder world beneath it. Administration, revenue, logistics, prestige, and force slowly drifting out of alignment. The deeper paradox is that Han's strength produced Han vulnerability. Vastness required delegation. Delegation created autonomous interests. Local administrators knew their districts better than the capital. Frontier generals built personal followings because frontier survival demanded it. Great families converted office into influence, influence into estates, and estates into private webs of dependence. For generations, the system endured because legitimacy, revenue, appointment, and coercive power still pointed back toward the imperial center. But once those lines began bending away from Luoyang, the architecture of order revealed its hidden fractures. Land slipping from the tax rolls, peasants falling into debt, court factions consuming trust, and survival itself becoming a negotiation with power outside the throne. Beneath the polished architecture of Han order, the first fractures did not appear as rebel banners or armies at the gate. They appeared in ledgers, land deeds, and tax registers that no longer described the real distribution of power. The Han state rested on the smallholding farmer. Families fixed to the soil, counted by officials, taxed in grain, summoned for corvée labor, and recorded as the living foundation of imperial revenue. This was the quiet engine beneath the dynasty's grandeur. Yet over generations, powerful local families absorbed peasant holdings through purchase, debt, patronage, marriage ties, and pressure that rarely needed to announce itself as violence. A household facing one failed harvest might borrow seed. A second failure might force a mortgage. A third could turn an imperial taxpayer into a tenant, and then into a dependent of a local magnate. That process was not merely economic decline. It was a constitutional wound. Every household that slipped beneath the shelter of a great estate weakened the fiscal reach of Luoyang. The emperor still claimed universal authority, but more of the countryside lived inside private webs of obligation. Great families could provide loans, protection, employment, influence, and sometimes concealment from official registers. In practical terms, land concentration turned local elites into alternative governments. The court saw vanishing revenue. Villages saw something more immediate. Survival increasingly came from nearby patrons, not distant imperial justice. For ordinary people, the pressure became layered and relentless. Taxes did not disappear because harvests failed. Labor obligations did not soften because families were hungry. Debt, famine, flood, drought, disease, and migration pressed against the same social base that the empire depended upon. Late Han records often framed disasters as omens, but behind that language stood administrative failure. Empty granaries were not only symbols of heaven's displeasure, they were proof that the state's promise of order had become uncertain. When relief failed, legitimacy did not collapse in a single dramatic moment. It thinned, season by season. Then came the second fracture, political distrust at the center. The Eastern Han court became a battlefield of access. Eunuchs, because they lived inside the palace and served near the emperor, became brokers of appointments, documents, information, and favor. Scholar officials denounced them as corrupt gatekeepers who distorted imperial will. Imperial relatives and regents, especially around young emperors, struggled to control succession, command, and policy. The problem was not simply that corruption existed. Every political order produces corruption. The deeper danger was that the court ceased to look like an impartial center of judgment. The Book of the Later Han preserves the memory of this poisonous struggle. Eunuch influence, official resentment, factional accusation, and punishment disguised as moral correction. The partisan prohibitions of the late 2nd century struck at critics among officials, students, and literati networks. Men who believed they were defending ethical government were excluded, imprisoned, or branded as factional enemies. A state that claimed to govern through virtue now treated some of its most vocal moral critics as threats to order. This psychological shift was decisive. Once elites began to believe that law was merely the mask worn by whichever faction controlled the palace, loyalty became conditional. Officials stopped asking only what served the dynasty and began asking who possessed the dynasty. Corruption, then, was not only a moral failure, it was a strategic failure. It destroyed trust in the center's ability to judge, reward, punish, and protect without being captured. From economic pressure and political distrust came the third movement, religious political mobilization. When a state cannot guarantee justice, suffering searches for another language. Healing cults, prophetic teachings, and millenarian hopes spread through communities crushed by taxes, debt, disease, and disaster. The Yellow Turbans would not emerge from nowhere as a chaos of irrational rebellion. They were the visible flame of a buried social volcano. By 184 AD, that volcano was ready to erupt. The Han still possessed armies, seals, governors, rituals, and ancestral prestige. But legitimacy had become brittle. The treasury had lost reach. The court had lost moral confidence. The countryside had lost patience. And into that combustible world stepped Zhang Zhu and the way of great peace, offering not reform from Luoyang, but renewal against it. By 184 AD, the suffering scattered across tax registers, debt contracts, failed harvests, epidemics, and village rumor finally acquired a banner. Its leader was Zhang Zhu, remembered in the Book of the Later Han as the central figure of the Way of Great Peace, a movement that fused healing, prophecy, and rebellion into one political weapon. To the court, it was sedition wrapped in sacred language. To its followers, it was a cure for a diseased age. Zhang Zhu did not merely offer consolation. He offered diagnosis. Corrupt officials, famine, sickness, landlord predation, and imperial weakness were not separate disasters. They were symptoms of a cosmic order that had gone wrong. The slogan associated with the movement captured that theology with terrifying simplicity. The blue heaven is dead, the yellow heaven shall rise. This was not mere superstition. It was an argument about legitimacy. If heaven had withdrawn favor from the Han, then obedience to the Han was no longer moral duty. Rebellion could be described as restoration. Treason could be preached as medicine. That is what made the Yellow Turban uprising so dangerous. It was not a local bandit outbreak to be smothered by a magistrate and a few patrols. It was a coordinated eruption across multiple regions, carried by networks of believers, healers, organizers, and desperate peasants who had concluded that endurance itself had become a form of slow death. The Han court faced the nightmare of every aging empire. When misery becomes organized, Bureaucracy is no longer enough. The rebellion was crushed. That fact matters. Loyal officials, imperial generals, regional commanders, and hastily raised armies broke the main Yellow Turban forces. Zhang Ju died during the crisis. Imperial authority survived on paper. But here lies the first great strategic twist of the late Han collapse. Victory itself became poisonous. To survive, the court had to do exactly what central power fears most. It empowered generals. It authorized regional officials to raise troops. It relied on local gentry families to organize militias. It allowed emergency commands, improvised armies, and provincial strongmen to become the line between order and annihilation. The state saved itself by teaching the provinces how to live without it. Inside that emergency, new careers began to harden. Cao Cao gained experience in suppression and command before he became the architect of northern power. Liu Bei emerged through local armed networks and personal loyalty before he became a dynastic claimant. Sun Jian distinguished himself in the violence of the age before his family became the foundation of Wu. These men were not yet the grand literary figures later celebrated in Romance of the Three Kingdoms. In strategic history, their significance is colder. They were products of a new world in which military competence could manufacture authority faster than court appointment could control it. The deeper lesson was institutional. A rebellion can be defeated in the field while still winning inside the nervous system of the state. Before 184, the Han ideal was that force flowed downward from the emperor through commanderies, counties, and appointed officials. After 184, protection increasingly flowed upward from local armed power. Villages survived because a nearby magnate raised troops. Officials endured because they could command men. Refugees followed whoever could feed them, discipline them, and defend them. Loyalty became practical before it became ideological. That shift is almost impossible to reverse. Once communities learn that survival depends less on imperial ritual than on the armed patron nearby, the emperor becomes more distant, more ceremonial, more dependent on those who claim to serve him. The Yellow Turbans failed to overthrow the dynasty. Yet they forced the dynasty to reveal a fatal truth. The Han no longer possessed an uncontested monopoly on rescue. And while the countryside had been militarized in the name of survival, the capital remained trapped in its own fever. The empire had beaten back rebellion in the provinces, but at the center, eunuchs, ministers, imperial relatives, and generals were still circling the throne. The next catastrophe would not begin in a village shrine. It would begin inside the palace itself. By 189 AD, the crisis no longer lived only in the countryside. The habit of armed autonomy, born in the struggle against the Yellow Turbans, moved inward toward Luoyang, until the palace itself became the next frontier of civil war. Emperor Ling died that year, and his death exposed the most dangerous weakness in any hereditary system. Succession does not merely transfer a crown. It invites every faction near the crown to decide who will command the future. The young Emperor Shao inherited the title, but not the machinery of power. Around him stood ministers, eunuchs, imperial relatives, commanders, and rival networks of patronage, each claiming loyalty to the dynasty while preparing for a struggle over the court. At the center stood He Jin, general-in-chief and half-brother of the Empress Dowager. He had rank. He had family access. He had military prestige. But he lacked the one instrument a fragile regime needs most: a peaceful and accepted mechanism for deciding who truly governs. For decades, the eunuchs had accumulated influence through proximity to the imperial household. They controlled access, messages, appointments, and the hidden channels through which palace power moved. Scholar officials denounced them as corrupt gatekeepers. Eunuchs viewed the scholar officials as aristocratic enemies waiting to destroy them. As the book of the later Han makes clear, court politics had stopped being a contest of policy. It had become a contest of survival. He Jin's objective was to eliminate the eunuch faction. Strategically, the aim was understandable. Politically, the method was disastrous. Instead of resolving the struggle through forces firmly tied to the court, he summoned outside military commanders to pressure the palace. Among them was Dong Zhuo, a frontier general from the northwest, shaped by border warfare, mobile armies, harsh bargaining, and the brutal mathematics of force. That decision broke the dynasty's inner seal. He Jin believed he was using provincial violence as a tool against palace intrigue. In reality, he taught men with armies that the imperial center could be entered, threatened, and possessed. The eunuchs struck first. He Jin was lured into the palace and killed. Retaliation followed immediately. His allies, including Yuan Shao, unleashed vengeance against the eunuch faction. The palace, meant to be the ritual heart of order under heaven, became a killing ground of political revenge. The sequence was mercilessly clear: invitation, assassination, retaliation, vacuum. Into that vacuum came Dong Zhuo. He arrived with troops whose loyalty did not belong to Luoyang ceremonies or bureaucratic etiquette. They answered to command, reward, fear, and survival. Dong Zhuo seized control of the capital and quickly understood the value of what had fallen into his hands. The emperor was young. The court was broken. Yet the imperial name still carried administrative electricity across the empire. Edicts still mattered. Seals still mattered. Rituals still mattered. But now all of it could be routed through a sword. Dong Zhuo deposed Emperor Shao and installed the younger Liu Xie as Emperor Xian. This was not merely an act of brutality. It was a constitutional revelation. If a commander could remove one emperor and enthrone another, then the throne was no longer the unquestioned source of political order. It had become an instrument through which armed power dressed itself in legality. The records of the Three Kingdoms, looking back through the lives of those who survived this age, preserves Dong Zhuo as a figure of terrible consequence. Later, the Zizhi Tongjian would arrange the crisis into a grim chronology. But beneath the moral horror was a sharper strategic truth. Dong Zhuo's terror exposed weakness as much as strength. He could coerce the court, but he could not make the elite class consent. He could occupy Luoyang, but he could not persuade the empire that his domination was legitimate. So intimidation became his language of rule. Officials were threatened. Rivals were eliminated. Wealth was extracted. And when resistance gathered, Dong Zhuo chose not to preserve Luoyang as the sacred center of Han authority. He stripped it, devastated it, and forced the court west toward Chang'an. The burning and abandonment of Luoyang was not mindless vandalism. It was extraction. It was hostage politics. If legitimacy could not be earned, it would be carried under guard. The Han court had summoned a wolf to frighten its enemies. The wolf discovered that the shepherd's staff was hollow. Yet Dong Zhuo's seizure created the force that would rise against him. Across the provinces, commanders who had learned to raise troops during the Yellow Turban crisis now found a nobler banner. Restore the Han, punish the tyrant, rescue the emperor. Under that banner, the first great coalition of warlords began to form, and with it came an even more dangerous discovery. Unity itself could become a negotiating table. Dong Zhuo's seizure of the court forced the eastern provinces into motion. Yet opposition to a tyrant is not the same thing as agreement about what should replace him. Across the empire, governors, administrators, aristocratic clans, and newly empowered commanders gathered beneath the safest banner available: restoration of the Han. At the front of this alliance stood Yuan Shao, whose family name carried enormous political weight. The Yuan clan had produced generations of high ministers, and in the late Han world, pedigree was not decoration. It was currency. Yuan Shao gave the coalition an aristocratic face, a figure who could make military resistance look like constitutional rescue rather than rebellion. Around him, regional leaders repeated the noble formula: punish Dong Zhuo, rescue the Son of Heaven, cleanse the court, restore order. But every coalition contains two languages. One is spoken aloud. The other is calculated in silence. Publicly, these men invoked loyalty, outrage, ancestral duty, and the dignity of the imperial house. Privately, each measured troops, grain, territory, family survival, local alliances, and the most dangerous question of all: who would command whom if Dong Zhuo fell? This was the anatomy of a failing empire. The same throne could still inspire oaths, but it no longer possessed the force to make those oaths converge into obedience. The records of the Three Kingdoms, through the later biographies of figures such as Cao Cao, Yuan Shao, and Sun Jian, preserves the careers that emerged from the shattered political landscape. Sima Guang's Zizhi Tongjian, compiled centuries later, gives the coalition a grim narrative rhythm. Declarations of common purpose, followed by hesitation, suspicion, and missed opportunity. The alliance had anger. It had numbers. What it lacked was a single sovereign will. Cao Cao grasped the danger earlier than most. At this stage, he was not yet the master of the North, only a rising commander inside a collapsing order. But he pressed for action while others delayed. To many coalition leaders, caution seemed prudent. Armies had to be assembled, reputations protected, risks distributed. Cao Cao saw a deeper problem. Legitimacy decays when it is not acted upon. To proclaim loyalty while refusing movement was to reduce restoration to theater. His impatience was not merely tactical. It revealed a mind that understood speed as a political weapon. Sun Jian, meanwhile, advanced with force in the campaign against Dong Zhuo. Later accounts connect him with the recovery of the imperial seal amid the ruins of Luoyang, though the source tradition is complicated and must be handled cautiously. Yet even as contested memory, the story is revealing. The seal, the object that symbolized imperial command, appears separated from a functioning imperial state. Authority had become portable, could be found hidden, claimed, disputed. The symbol survived, but the system around it was breaking. Dong Zhuo's response was not to defend Luoyang as sacred ground. He withdrew west toward Chang'an, taking the emperor and court with him, while the capital region was devastated. This was more than brutality. It was strategic denial. If the coalition claimed to be restoring the empire, Dong Zhuo would remove the living symbol of that empire and leave behind a ruined stage. When a ruler cannot generate consent, he may still weaponize absence. And there lay the coalition's true failure. Its leaders could condemn Dong Zhuo, but they could not rebuild the authority his violence had exposed as hollow. No commander wished to defeat the tyrant only to become subordinate again. No provincial powerholder wished to disarm while rivals remained armed. The coalition did not restore the empire. It trained the warlords to speak the language of loyalty while acting in the logic of sovereignty. What began as a righteous alliance became a negotiating table with armies attached. And among the men watching this lesson unfold, Cao Cao would soon identify the most valuable asset in China. Not a province, not a fortress, not even a victory in the field, but access to the emperor himself. Coalition politics had exposed a brutal truth. Loyalty to the Han could be worn like ceremonial armor, while every commander counted land, grain, troops, and advantage. Cao Cao's genius was not that he joined this theater. His genius was that he learned how to direct it. After Dong Zhuo's assassination in 192 AD, the imperial court did not regain its freedom. It drifted from one armed protector to another, surrounded by officials without security, capitals without stability, and commanders who treated rescue as a form of possession. Emperor Xian remained the son of heaven in ritual language. His seal still mattered. His edicts still carried the grammar of lawful rule. But the institution behind those edicts had been gutted. The throne had become priceless precisely because it no longer had a fortress of its own. This was the opening Cao Cao understood more clearly than his rivals. The throne was not power. Access to the throne was power. In 196 AD, Cao Cao secured Emperor Xian and established the imperial court at Xuchang. The records of the Three Kingdoms, especially the Wei Annals and Cao Cao's biography, preserve the memory of this moment not as a coronation, and not as a crude usurpation, but as something more sophisticated, the capture of legitimacy without the burden of openly destroying it. Cao Cao did not need to wear the crown. He needed to stand close enough to it that command itself could speak in imperial language. Later traditions summarized the strategy as controlling the emperor to command the lords. But that phrase is too small if it is treated as a mere hostage arrangement. Cao Cao gained a legal machine. Appointments could be issued in the emperor's name. Campaigns could be framed as punishments against rebels. Rivals could be condemned not simply as enemies of Cao Cao, but as enemies of the Han order they claimed to defend. Titles, ranks, pardons, denunciations, calendars, hierarchy. The symbolic currency of empire now moved through his headquarters. This created a legitimacy trap. Obedience strengthened Cao Cao. Defiance made a rival appear disloyal to the dynasty. In a fractured world, moral language became an instrument of maneuver. The strongest political strategies often work this way. They do not merely defeat an opponent's army. They define the field on which every opponent must justify existing. Yet Cao Cao was not only a manipulator of symbols. His power rested on administration hardened by catastrophe. He expanded Tuntian agricultural colonies, settling soldiers, refugees, and displaced populations onto land that could feed armies and restore production. He reorganized manpower. He imposed discipline on officials. He recruited ability beyond the narrowest aristocratic circles while still managing the old elites carefully enough to use their prestige without becoming their servant. Modern historians such as Rafe de Crespigny have emphasized this side of Cao Cao's consolidation. His strength was military, but it was also logistical, fiscal, and institutional. In an age of broken households and wandering populations, grain was strategy. Registration was strategy. Appointment was strategy. This is why the caricature of Cao Cao as merely ruthless fails. Ruthlessness was common. Many commanders killed, threatened, betrayed, and plundered. Cao Cao's distinction was that he converted violence into structure. He took the exhausted remains of the Han court and made them the nerve center of a new northern order. He saved the imperial institution by turning it into an instrument, and in doing so, he hollowed it as an independent authority. The moral ambiguity is the essence of the man. Cao Cao did not formally seize the imperial throne during his lifetime. Only after his death would his successors posthumously honor him as Emperor Wu of Wei. But long before that title was placed backward upon his memory, he had mastered the practical mechanics of sovereignty. A dynasty could survive in name while its decision-making soul migrated elsewhere. Against him stood Yuan Shao. Aristocratic, prestigious, rich in territory, manpower, lineage, and elite recognition. Yuan Shao possessed many advantages that history often rewards. But he failed to exploit the emperor with the same precision. He had weight. Cao Cao had leverage. He had grandeur. Cao Cao had the machinery that made grandeur actionable. The coming struggle, then, was not simply a clash between two warlords. It was a contest between mass and command, inheritance and adaptation, noble prestige and administrative realism. Yuan Shao should have overwhelmed him. On the map, the imbalance looked almost absurd. But history is rarely decided by size alone. It is decided by the leader who understands which part of the system, once seized, makes every other part move. The possession of Emperor Xian had given Cao Cao a weapon no rival could dismiss. But legitimacy alone could not stop an army. A seal could authorize a campaign. It could not feed horses, guard river crossings, calm exhausted officers, or keep ambitious allies from measuring the odds of survival. By 200 AD, Cao Cao's greatest political invention had to pass through the oldest tribunal in history: war. North of the Yellow River stood Yuan Shao, the aristocratic colossus of the age. After defeating Gongsun Zan, he controlled vast northern territories rich in grain, manpower, horses, and elite patronage networks. His family name carried generations of prestige. His camp seemed, on paper, like the natural heir to the Han world. Wealthy, well-born, expansive, and surrounded by men fluent in the language of rank and office, Yuan Shao possessed the visible instruments of dominance. Cao Cao possessed something less obvious, and ultimately more dangerous: a compressed strategic machine. Cao Cao's position was narrower and more precarious, but it was also sharper. His command was tighter. His discipline was harsher. His decisions moved faster. He held the emperor, but he also held an organization trained for crisis rather than ceremony. Yuan Shao's strength was aristocratic breadth. Many territories, many advisors, many factions, many claims to honor. Cao Cao's strength was unity of motion. The coming collision was therefore not merely a duel between two men. It was a test between two political organisms: mass against agility, pedigree against adaptation, coalition confidence against command speed. The campaign that came to a head at Guandu in 200 AD must be handled with care. Chen Shou's records of the Three Kingdoms and the later Zizhi Tongjian preserve powerful accounts of the struggle, but exact troop numbers in ancient warfare often expand under the pressure of memory and political storytelling. The essential pattern, however, is clear. Yuan Shao pressed south with superior resources. Cao Cao, positioned near Guandu, had to absorb that pressure without allowing his smaller base to be strangled. The question was not simply who could win a battle. The question was whether a leaner command system could survive the gravitational weight of a larger one. Guandu was logistics wearing the mask of heroism. Armies do not live on banners, reputations, or noble genealogies. They live on grain depots, transport routes, draft animals, clerks, camp discipline, river access, and the shared belief that tomorrow's ration will arrive. Yuan Shao's mass was formidable, but mass is appetite. Every additional soldier increased the invisible burden behind the front. A large army can intimidate the eye while quietly exhausting the system that sustains it. Then came the decisive fracture. Su, formerly connected to Yuan Shao's side, defected to Cao Cao and revealed critical intelligence about the supply depot at Wuchao. This moment is often remembered as the hinge of the campaign, but it was not a miracle dropped into Cao Cao's hands. Information does not become power automatically. In a slower, more suspicious, more divided command structure, such news might have died in debate, caution, rivalry, or disbelief. Cao Cao's advantage was that his system could convert intelligence into action before the enemy could repair the breach. He launched the raid on Wuchao. The strike did not attack the face of Yuan Shao's army. It attacked its bloodstream. Supplies were destroyed. Confidence cracked. Rumor moved faster than orders. Panic began where logistics ended. Yuan Shao still had prestige. He still had men. He still had the aura of superior scale. But an army whose supply faith has been shattered becomes a crowd waiting for explanation. Here the deeper law of war revealed itself. A force can be defeated without being physically annihilated if its system of expectation collapses. Cao Cao had not merely damaged Yuan Shao's stores. He had exposed the fragility inside Yuan Shao's coalition. Aristocratic magnitude had met operational speed, and speed had found the artery. The aftermath unfolded with ruthless clarity. Yuan Shao's authority weakened, and his death in 202 AD opened succession disputes among his heirs. Cao Cao exploited those divisions with the same cold patience he had shown at Guandu. Piece by piece, the north tilted toward him. The emperor remained in his custody. The bureaucracy increasingly served his purposes. The rival who should have overwhelmed him became instead the great warning of the age. Resources are not strategy, and prestige is not command. Yet Guandu did not end the division of China, changed its geometry. With the north bending toward Cao Cao, the next test would not be another aristocratic camp on the northern plains. It would be the south. River country, naval warfare, extended supply lines, unfamiliar disease environments, and leaders who understood that surrender to northern momentum would mean the extinction of their own political futures. Guandu had broken Yuan Shao's aura, and the years that followed turned defeat into disintegration. By 208 AD, Cao Cao had absorbed much of the northern heartland, neutralized rival heirs, and stood closer than any figure since the restoration of the Eastern Han to stitching the empire back together. He possessed the emperor. He commanded the language of legality. He controlled officials, grain, cavalry, and the terrifying momentum that makes resistance appear less like courage than delayed surrender. But China was not only a northern plain. It was also river systems, mountain corridors, fortified clans, maritime habits, refugee networks, and regional political cultures that did not automatically obey because a northern army had won a northern war. Cao Cao's southward movement was therefore more than expansion. It was a test of whether victory could be translated across geography. The immediate prize was Jing province. Jing was not a peripheral possession to be collected after the real contest had ended. It was the hinge of the southern chessboard, a corridor between north and south, a basin of population and grain, a gateway into the middle Yangtze, and a staging ground from which armies and fleets could push east toward the lower riverlands or west toward Yi province. Whoever controlled Jing controlled routes, refugees, military depth, and the political raw material from which future regimes could be built. 4 years, Jing had been held by Liu Biao, a scholar-governor of aristocratic bearing and cautious temperament. His province became a refuge for displaced elites, soldiers, and political survivors of the northern wars. Among them was Liu Bei, the persistent fugitive of late Han history, defeated, uprooted, dependent on patrons, yet never politically extinguished. In the biographies preserved by Chun Shou's records of the Three Kingdoms, Liu Bei at this stage appears less as a conqueror than as a carrier of alternative legitimacy. His power was fragile, but it was portable. Men followed him because he represented a claim, a network, and the possibility that the Han name could survive outside Cao Cao's custody. Then Liu Biao died. In an age of imperial collapse, death was rarely private. It became a constitutional event. Liu Biao's succession crisis opened the gate Cao Cao needed. Liu Cong, the younger son who inherited the exposed position, submitted. Strategically, the choice was understandable. Cao Cao seemed irresistible. Resistance could bring devastation. Surrender might preserve local elites beneath the northern settlement. Yet every submission also sends a signal. Cao Cao's march now appeared less like invasion than inevitability. Liu Bei refused to vanish inside that inevitability. His retreat southward was not merely flight, and later literary tradition would transform it into scenes of heroic suffering. Stripped of romance of the Three Kingdoms embellishment, the strategic meaning remains sharper. Liu Bei was preserving a political organism. Soldiers, officials, dependents, families, clients, and hopes moved with him. In moments of collapse, survival itself can become a doctrine. Farther down the Yangtze, Sun Quan faced the decision upon which the next age would turn. He had inherited the eastern power built by Sun Jian and Sun AD, rooted in river warfare, local alliances, and the hard politics of the lower Yangtze. Cao Cao's pressure arrived wrapped in imperial language. Submission promised titles, survival, and perhaps privileged autonomy beneath northern dominance. Resistance promised independence, but also annihilation if the coalition failed. The debate inside Sun Quan's court was not a theatrical pause before a heroic battle. It was a strategic argument over the meaning of survival. Accommodation could be prudence, but it could also be the first stage of absorption. Lu Su saw the larger structure. Sun Quan's regime could not remain itself if it surrendered the initiative. Zhou Yu, presented in the records as a commander of disciplined judgment, looked past Cao Cao's grandeur and measured the weaknesses underneath. Zhuge Liang, later magnified by the Romance tradition into near-supernatural brilliance, appears in the recoverable historical frame as Liu Bei's envoy and strategist, helping articulate the logic of alliance. Sun and Liu did not need sentimental unity. They needed each other because neither could withstand Cao Cao alone. Cao Cao's strength was real, but strength changes shape when carried beyond its natural ecosystem. His army operated far from its northern base. Its supply lines ran through newly submitted territory. Disease threatened men unaccustomed to southern conditions. Naval warfare on the Yangtze demanded skills different from cavalry maneuver and northern field command. Surrendered Jing ships and crews offered assets, but integration under wartime pressure is not the same as loyalty. The very speed of Cao Cao's success created a dangerous illusion. he began to treat momentum as obedience. That was the opening the South required. Red Cliffs was not born from miracle. It was born from calculation, from the recognition that an empire advancing too quickly can become vulnerable at the point where confidence outruns supply, command culture, geography, and consent. Along the Yangtze, the question hardened into action. Would Cao Cao complete reunification, or would geography, coalition, disease, naval warfare, and political refusal deny him the empire at the edge of triumph? Cao Cao's southern campaign had reached the point where momentum met the river. The Yangtze was not merely a line of water across the map. It was a military frontier, a logistical system, a cultural boundary, and a strategic filter that punished any commander who confused conquest on land with command over a river world. Somewhere along this campaign theater, in the region remembered as Red Cliffs in 208 AD, with the precise location still debated, the dream of rapid Han reunification broke against geography, coalition politics, disease, and the limits of overextended power. The sources demand caution. Yuan Shao's records of the Three Kingdoms preserves the essential political memory of the successor states. Sima Guang's later Zizhi Tongjian gives the conflict a broader chronological architecture. The romance of the Three Kingdoms, magnificent as literature, transforms Red Cliffs into a theater of almost supernatural brilliance. But strategic history requires a colder question. Not whether the battle became legendary, but why Cao Cao's system failed when it seemed closest to triumph. The alliance opposing him was not sentimental unity. Sun Quan and Liu Bei were not bound together by trust, affection, or a shared vision of government. They were political survivors facing absorption. Liu Bei needed space, followers, and a defensible claim to legitimacy after retreat and displacement. Sun Quan needed to preserve the lower Yangtze power base built through the careers of Sun Jian and Sun AD. Their coalition was a marriage of necessity, and necessity is often the most honest architect in history. It does not require love. It does not even require confidence. It requires a shared fear of extinction. Cao Cao, by contrast, carried the aura of inevitability. He had defeated Yuan Shao at Guandu, controlled the emperor, consolidated the north, and gained momentum through the submission of Jing province under Lu Kang. Yet that very speed concealed strategic decay. His forces were far from their northern base. Supply lines extended through recently absorbed territory. Disease weakened the army. Soldiers trained for northern campaigns now faced river operations, ships, currents, unfamiliar conditions, and opponents whose commanders understood the Yangtze as an instrument of war. Many of Cao Cao's ships and crews came from surrendered southern forces, valuable in inventory, uncertain in loyalty. A fleet can be counted. Loyalty cannot. Then came the famous fire attack tradition, associated above all with Huanggai's feigned surrender. In the classic account, deception opens the way for burning vessels. Disorder spreads through Cao Cao's clustered fleet, and the northern offensive collapses in flame. Whether every detail unfolded as later memory polished it matters less than the operational truth beneath the story. The Allied command struck precisely where Cao Cao's campaign was already weakest. Logistics, sickness, naval inexperience, uncertain crews, and overconfidence had converged into a single point of failure. Deception is rarely magic. It is most powerful when it gives a strained system permission to collapse. Red Cliffs was not won by romance. It was won by the refusal to accept inevitability, by commanders who understood the river, and by the brutal mathematics of overreach. Cao Cao retreated. The northern advance broke. Southern autonomy survived. And after Red Cliffs, unity remained an ideal, but no longer a practical outcome. That is the grand hinge. Before Red Cliffs, Cao Cao could plausibly appear as the man who would end fragmentation under the legal shadow of the Han court. After Red Cliffs, he remained the greatest power in China, but no longer the only future. Liu Bei would expand influence in Jing and later move west into Yi province, laying the foundation for Shuhan. Sun Quan would secure the lower Yangtze, turning regional defense into durable statecraft. Cao Cao would dominate the north, but dominance was no longer destiny. Red Cliffs transformed a civil war of reunification into a long geopolitical triangle. Temporary survival hardened into administrative separation. Military zones became courts. Defensive alliances became sovereign claims. The battle did not create the Three Kingdoms in a single instant, but it made them historically viable. What followed was no longer merely the collapse of Han authority. It was the birth of competing answers to the same terrifying question. When the old empire dies, who has the right to inherit its name? Red Cliffs did not end the struggle. It did something more consequential. It denied inevitability. After 208 AD, Cao Cao remained the strongest man in China, but strength had encountered geography, disease, coalition politics, and the hard arithmetic of distance. The empire had not been restored. It had been suspended. In the north, Cao Cao continued to rule as the indispensable power behind the Han court. He held Emperor Xian, commanded the largest military administrative apparatus, and governed through a regime that looked, in every practical sense, like a state inside the shell of a dynasty. Yet he did not formally seize the imperial title. That restraint was not simple humility. It was political intelligence. The Han name still carried ritual force. To discard it too early would have transformed useful legitimacy into naked usurpation. Cao Cao understood the central paradox of the age. The throne was often more valuable when controlled than when worn. Then, in 220 AD, Cao Cao died. His son, Cao Pai, inherited more than armies, officials, granaries, and commanderies. He inherited a machine already prepared for legal transformation. The final act was theater, but in imperial politics, theater can become law. Emperor Xian, the long hostage sovereign of a broken order, was compelled to abdicate. Cao Pai accepted the transfer and founded Wei. The Han Dynasty, begun in 206 BC and restored after Wang Mang's interruption, had survived rebellion, court purges, frontier war, and regional militarization. Now it ended in formal political terms. The abdication ritual mattered because Wei could not afford to appear as mere violence. It claimed that heaven's mandate had moved, that orderly succession had occurred, that the old dynasty had exhausted its virtue, and that a new house had inherited responsibility. This was the genius and danger of political ceremony. It could turn coercion into procedure, and procedure into memory. But legitimacy does not obey a single proclamation when rival armies still survive. In 221 AD, Liu Bei declared himself Emperor of Shuhan in the southwest. His claim rested on a different logic. Wei possessed the abdication. Liu Bei claimed continuation. As a member of the Liu lineage, he framed his state not as rebellion, but as restoration. The true Han preserved in exile, territorially reduced but morally unbroken. This was legitimacy as bloodline, grievance, and sacred continuity. Sun Quan waited longer. In the lower Yangtze world, power had been built through river command, regional administration, diplomacy, and survival between larger ideological claims. He accepted titles when useful, resisted subordination when necessary, and converted distance into autonomy. Then, in 229 AD, Sun Quan declared himself Emperor of Wu. His claim was less elegant in dynastic language, but it rested on a brutal political fact. A regime that taxes, recruits, governs, negotiates, and defends itself eventually demands a title equal to its power. Thus, the three kingdoms were not simply three warlord camps dressed in legend. They were administrative military states with competing theories of rightful rule. Wei claimed legitimacy through control, institutional continuity, and the abdication of Emperor Xian. Shu claimed legitimacy through Han lineage and moral restoration. Wu claimed legitimacy through regional sovereignty and strategic necessity. Each collected revenue, appointed officials, mobilized labor, managed elites, conducted diplomacy, and taught its population that obedience was not merely forced, but justified. Yuan Shao's records of the three kingdoms preserves these founding narratives with the sober weight of successor state memory. Sima Guang's later Zizhi Tongjian arranged the era into a broader chronological and moral sequence. Far later, romance of the three kingdoms transformed the age into literature. Magnificent, enduring, and culturally powerful, but not identical to administrative history. The final irony came in 280 AD, when the Jin conquered Wu and reunited China. Yet reunification did not erase what the Han collapse had revealed. For generations, unity had given way to durable rivals armed not only with soldiers, but with arguments. Survival had hardened into sovereignty. Warlords had become governments. Claims had become institutions. The fall of the Han, then, was not a single death blow. It was the long separation of symbol from force, force from obedience, and obedience from any shared belief that one center still deserved to command. The map changed because the meaning of authority changed, and that deeper fracture opens the final question beneath the catastrophe. What dies first in a collapsing empire? The army, the treasury, or the belief that the center still has the right to rule? The final verdict, then, is not that the Han collapsed because ambitious men appeared. Ambitious men are one of history's most renewable resources. The colder truth is that the Han fell when legitimacy and force stopped living inside the same institution. Emperor Xian still possessed the sacred grammar of rule. Edicts still carried the seal of dynasty. Titles still arranged the hierarchy of public life. The calendar, the ancestral rites, the language of heaven, office, rank, and obedience did not disappear in a single dramatic instant. But the emperor could no longer command armies by independent will. He could not secure the granaries without another man's machinery. He could not appoint, punish, reward, or govern without passing through the coercive power of those who had captured the state around him. Meanwhile, the warlords possessed what the throne had lost: soldiers, revenues, provinces, fortresses, officers, supply networks, and the obedience born from protection. Yet, even they still needed imperial language. Violence alone could seize territory. It could not easily explain why obedience was rightful. That was the terrible inversion of the late Han. The throne remained necessary, but no longer sovereign. The sword became sovereign, but still needed the throne. The mechanics of collapse were devastating because they were cumulative. First, social distress undermined trust. Land concentration, debt, famine, taxation, and dependency taught millions that the imperial order no longer reliably protected the life it claimed to regulate. Second, rebellion militarized the provinces. The Yellow Turban uprising was defeated, but the cure poisoned the patient. Emergency armies, local militias, and regional commanders learned that survival could be organized outside the direct hand of the court. Third, palace intrigue invited external force. A court unable to resolve its own factional war summoned power from beyond the gates. And Dong Zhuo proved that the center of the empire could be occupied, manipulated, and terrorized from within. Fourth, strategic rivals converted restoration into sovereignty. Yuan Shao, Cao Cao, Liu Bei, Sun Quan, and their circles all spoke in the language of saving the Han, while building structures that made the Han unnecessary. This is why the late Han is not merely the introduction to famous battles. The book of the later Han preserves the world of court crisis, eunuch power, scholar-official outrage, and dynastic exhaustion. Chun Shou's records of the three kingdoms gives the successor states their hard political memory. Sima Guang's Ziji Tongjian later arranges the long catastrophe into a chronological mirror for rulers. And the romance of the three kingdoms, magnificent as literature, became the cultural afterlife of the age. Not the same as administrative history, but proof that later generations felt the wound deeply enough to turn it into legend. The deeper pattern remains unsettling. States become fragile when institutions outsource violence and assume obedience will return once the emergency ends. They become fragile when legitimacy becomes performance. Ceremony without capacity, titles without trust, law without enforcement. They become fragile when temporary measures create permanent alternative centers of power, and when elites defend institutions in public while hollowing them in private. Human nature has not changed as much as its costumes. Ambition flourishes in ambiguity. Crisis rewards the actor who moves before legality has caught up. And institutions often die not when their enemies denounce them, but when their supposed guardians discover they can preserve the symbol while stealing the substance. So the legacy question is not merely why the Han fell. It is more severe. When a society looks toward its highest office, its oldest laws, and its most sacred rituals, how can anyone know whether power still lives there, or whether power has quietly moved elsewhere? Emperor Xian remains the final image. Enthroned, recognized, surrounded by the vocabulary of majesty, yet carried by forces he could no longer command. Not a useless relic, but a warning carved into history. Sometimes the throne survives long after the state has departed. For more grand strategic histories of civilization, collapse, and the human condition, subscribe to Archives of Humanity, where each documentary follows the deeper architecture behind power. Select the video appearing on the end screen to continue the journey.